Oh, okay. And she tells me I have to stand here. I'd like to say fellow Tulanians and not fellow, I'm looking for another word. Joint Tulanians and other interested parties. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our first Tulane Alumni Academy lecture hosted by the Emeritus. I'm pleased to introduce a distinguished guest, Professor John Verano, who is a world-renowned biologist, anthropologist, and leading authority on the study of health issues, disease, mortuary practices, and ancient societies. After earning his BA in anthropology at Stanford, Professor Verano earned his MA and PhD at the University of California in Los Angeles. He pursued a doctoral fellowship, postdoctoral fellowship at the National Museum of Natural History. Excuse me.
Smithsonian Institution.
Yes. Sure, thanks. Before accepting a position in the anthropology department of Tulane University, he's taught here for over 20 years. His primary research focuses on Andean South America, emphasizing prehistoric populations, coastal and highland Peru. I've been fascinated with that since I was a kid, until I learned that they sacrificed people. And then I wasn't so sure. His work has contributed significantly to our understanding of those societies, revealed insights into the lives and rituals of those people, including their funerary practices. And I have a look at it. Does that mean putting a hole in the skull to treat diseases?
So surgery, yes, combination,
Okay.
and anesthesia.
Health status and the dark practice of human sacrifice. He has authored and co-edited several influential books. And we're honored to have him here to share his knowledge, to reignite our interest in that subject. And he just told me that his wife is recently retired. You're a specialist in sort of the Incas, and she was more involved with the Aztecs. My two fascinations as a kid. So we're happy to have you here, and maybe we can get your wife to come sometime too.
Thanks so much for the introduction. Yes, my wife right now is training our dog, our Rottweiler, in competitive obedience and agility. She says, I love being retired. Although she still has some grad students that she's finishing and she's still writing articles. She said, I'm not going to write any more books. She's done some amazing books herself. So today what I'm going to do, I'm happy to be here with the Emeritus Club and appreciate being invited by Gabby to come, and I'm happy to do it. Thursday is not a teaching day, so I have some free time. What I'd like to do is show you a little bit about Peru. Let me just see a little show of hands for those who are here today. How many have been to Peru? All right, great. You good. The rest of you have to go. Maybe not this year, but when things calm down a little bit. I can't go this summer because of social unrest there, and our field school has been canceled. But I hope to go back as soon as I can. I may go down myself, but the field school I was going to participate in for excess caution, perhaps they didn't want to send college students down to somewhere where they would get in harm's way. So anyway, I'm going to share with you a little bit about my work. I've been at Tulane probably 28 years, but I've been working in Peru maybe 35 years, every summer just about. So it's kind of my second home. What I want to share with you today is for those of you who know a little about Peru and those of you who don't, some of the amazing discoveries that have been made archaeologically in the last 20 years, actually, and I've participated in a number of them. My specialty really is the human skeleton. So if they find skeletons, they ask me to come and look at them. I don't do the ceramics or the textiles or architecture so much, but I work with experts in that. So archaeology today, of course, is multidisciplinary and it's international. I'm working with Peruvian scholars, a French scholar, DNA by a German scholar, and so on. So it's not kind of like, it's not much like Indiana Jones in the old days where he would put his hat on and go down there and find the idol and then try and get out before the Nazis got him, that kind of thing. Sometimes I do wear a hat like that. People say, "Are you Indiana Jones?" I said, no, somebody's very different. Okay, let me just begin with our talk. What I'm going to look at today is some royal tombs that have been found in Peru in recent years, and the study of them, and one in particular, which is going to be my focus here on the screen here. And you'll see soon that it's pretty amazing. Let me just see if I need to turn this on. There we go. Now, I can't start without showing Machu Picchu. This is a picture I took years ago. I've been there twice, once with my wife, once with a former girlfriend, that was before. And that will remain undescribed, but I've been a couple times just as a tourist. As an archaeology student, I was too busy to go up there. I was working on the North Coast. I would help set up the camp, close up the camp, fly back to the US. So it was only after I finished my PhD, I was able to actually do a little traveling and with my wife do some road trips throughout Peru. Beautiful place. Now, Machu Picchu, I've not excavated there. And in fact, there are very few excavations there in the last 100 years. Mainly what they're doing is preserving the site. But I did study the skeletons, the tombs that surround Machu Picchu at the invitation of Yale University a few years ago. And so I've held the bones of those people buried there. And there's some important studies that are about to come out, DNA analysis of these people, isotopic analysis, and new radiocarbon dates. So we're going to know more about Machu Picchu real soon. Okay. Now this is more like where I work. On the north coast of Peru, they have pyramids as well, and ceremonial sites, and some amazing archaeology, and you're going to see some tombs from there in just a minute. They built with adobe bricks, as you can see here. They didn't build with stone. There were some rock outcrops on the coast, but they didn't have the quality of stone that the Inca did. So also on the coast of Peru, it almost never rains. So adobe buildings are just fine unless there's an El Nino and then they get wet and there's damage to them. But this particular temple is about 1,500 years old, and it's done quite well. This was during excavations of it a few years ago when I worked there. Now, I'm going to focus on a culture named the Moche. They are named after the Moche River, which is here, and a principal site with pyramids at Moche that have been studied for more than 100 years by archaeologists. This lighter color up and down the map is the territory of the Moche, and every red triangle is a ceremonial center, is an important site. And today we're going to talk about one in particular, El Brujo, it's called, in the Chicama River Valley, just one valley to the north. But first we'll look at Moche briefly and the culture itself, just so if you're not familiar with it. The Moche produced some of the finest ceramic art anywhere in the New World, and arguably anywhere in the world, including realistic portraits of what we consider to be real people. Of course, the Moche, like all other Andean societies, had no written language. Unlike the Aztecs of Mexico, who had a pictographic language, the Maya, who had a hieroglyphic language, the Moche and those who came after them did not have language. So we have no written history. And the Moche disappeared some 500, 600 years before the Inca conquered the north coast of Peru. So they were somewhat of a memory buried in the sand there. Now, they also excelled in metalwork, and this is less known perhaps, unless you're an art collector. If you are an art collector or a museum, you'll know the amazing work that Moche did. Some of the best metallurgy in the New World, including gold, silver, alloys of gold and copper. So they did electroplating, chemical electroplating of gold on copper, long before Europe and the Middle East ever learned to do that. And these are just four pieces that I think are particularly attractive. And if you don't know what they are, they're nose ornaments. These clip on your nose. And so these would be worn by very high status people. You can imagine that common people could not have someone make gold objects for them. And they are very creative. You can see here's a bat, there's a face of a monkey, and some mythical animals, some of which we'll see today. There's an owl, and down here, more geometric kind of design. And These things, of course, are very valuable on the art market, so most of them have ended up in private collections or in art museums. But we're going to see ones like these that were excavated in context. So now this was excavated by one of my professors at UCLA who invited me to prove for the first time, and I fell in love with it, Christopher Donnan. Okay. Now the Moche also, in addition to model pieces, also did fine line painting. It was done in slip, equivalent, similar to classical Greece, where you have vessels that are painted. And what these are very valuable for is a colleague of ours, Donna McClellan, drew out many of these, did these roll-out drawings. This is a drawing of what's on this ceramic vessel, the two warriors on each side. This allows us to look at it a little bit more easily than trying to turn a vessel around. And this can be diffused, it can be sent around, and there is an archive now at Dumbarton Oaks in Washington, the Donnan Archive, where these things have all been donated, the drawings. Now, what it shows here, and I'm not going to focus on this, but I did mention in my talk title, human sacrifice. The Moche were a warlike people, and these are scenes of combat. And we know that the combat was not simply symbolic, although they are dressed to the nines. I've never seen soldiers dressed so fancy, including with nose ornaments. I wouldn't go into a boxing ring with a nose ornament on. They'd say, okay, here you go, give you that. So they depicted this, and these scenes were some of the most common ones they showed. And they even did this on a grand scale. This is the Pyramid of the Moon at Moche, where I've worked for many years. And what this is the north facade of the pyramid. By great luck, it was covered with windblown sand after it was abandoned. So this, of course, is a reconstruction of it. But these murals are quite clear and colorful today. Their color is the same as they were presumably in the past. But what's kind of dark about it is these are long lines of prisoners, naked prisoners being pulled on ropes and being led by warriors who are often carrying their weapons, the weapons of their captives, on their war clubs. So this is kind of like, for me, like the ultimate billboard for advertising your pyramid as a great, powerful place. The scenes above it include supernaturals holding human heads and knives. There's kind of a dragon-like form. There's a spider form. There's the decapitator god. So there's all of this kind of symbolic violence on their north facade. And of course, probably a few thousand people could gather down below to watch, presumably, sacrifice of captives. But I want to talk about something a little bit, since I do so much sacrifice. I want to talk a little bit more about the positive things that we found, maybe the beauty of their art. Here was a revolution, in a sense, for Moche archaeology in 1987. That's going way back now. At this pyramid complex in Lambayeque, a site called Sipan. Walter Alba, a Peruvian archaeologist and good friend for many years, he just was honored in Los Angeles with a whole day of conferences by his fellow colleagues and students. He was an archaeology inspector in the valley and heard about grave robbing and came and did a rescue excavation, hoping he might find another tomb. And he sure enough did. This is an intact tomb. The looted tomb we knew nothing about except the big hole in the ground and objects appearing all over the world in the art market. We didn't know where things came from. This is a National Geographic reconstruction of the tomb of the warrior priest or the Lord of Sipan, with accompanying burials. Some of these are clearly retainers, sacrifices that were put in with him. And this is just a rollout of all of the different things that they've been able to identify, which included nose ornaments, crowns, emblems, feather headdresses with some remains of the feathers, so the birds could even be identified. These apparently are feathers from lakes in Chile. What am I thinking about? The flamingo. They're flamingo feathers. And then all kinds of other accompaniments. Now, this is a reconstruction, but to show you what it looked like in the flesh, unfortunately, in the northern valleys of Peru, due to occasional rainfalls, the organic materials are destroyed. So we can see some of the ear spools he had and all the metal objects. And Walter spent more than a year slowly excavating this particular tomb. So we know about this rollout primarily through the reconstruction of what Walter was able to do. Now, he also found 2 years later an earlier tomb. This was called the Old Lord of Sipan, or at least he called it that. And this, as you can see, is also covered with all kinds of metal nose ornaments, ear spools, and so on. But again, the organic material is all gone. But these are spears, and there are war clubs and other things that he was buried with. Okay. Now, what this led to was through the work primarily of Christopher Donnan, my professor at UCLA, he had noticed this rollout drawing on this bottle. He had studied it years before, and he thought it presented a mythical scene because the people up here either have fangs, or this is somebody who's half bird, half human. And this one is a woman, it turned out, who had braids that ended in snakeheads. And that was a scene of somebody being presented a cup, and then below you see captives being sacrificed by having their throats slit. And this is the way the moche showed blood coming down from the neck. And so in the upper register, they're carrying these goblets to the Lord of Sipan. Now, Chris thought this was just a mythical scene for years until the Lord of Sipan's tomb was found. He was found with this type of crown, with this back ornament, with all these other things. He was the most elaborate moche burial ever found. And the interesting thing for diversity was that this figure, who he just called figure C, in the beginning he had no idea what to call them, A, B, C, D. Pat Lyon out at Berkeley, a woman, Andean archaeologist, she said, you know, that's a woman, she's got braids, and her outfit is different. And sure enough, several years later at a site just south of Sipan, called San Jose de Moro in the Hecatepeque Valley, the first of a whole series of tombs, and I'm just going to show you quickly the details. These are tombs of high status women, and in fact, they are now been called priestesses in the sacrifice ceremony, and I'll show you how they're identified. First of all, here's the principal burial. There's some sacrifices in her tomb as well, retainer burials. And then there is a funerary mass, but it's not over her, it's over her coffin. The coffin is deteriorated. But what's interesting about it is the priestess in the mural, and there are giant murals of this in further south, she always had this funny headdress. It looked kind of like a jester's kind of headdress. Well, sure enough, these women have that same headdress, and it's very easily recognizable. So that marked them as priestesses. They're also buried with goblets, presumably the goblet that they presented to the Lord of Sipan. So we're little by little, although we have no written history or accounts of this, we've been able to put together some of these characters in the scene, the Lord of Sipan and some of these accompanying burials. Now we later, which I won't show today because that would be too long, but we've now found hundreds of moche captives sacrificed at the Pyramid of the Moon, and their throats are slit. So that matches the iconography. The site we're going to look at here is just one valley north of the Moche Valley, and it's called El Brujo. This particular pyramid is called Huacacao. This is the way it looked in 1990, and it looked like just an eroded hill, except when they started clearing off its north facade, they found a series of murals very similar to what we saw at the Pyramid of the Moon. You see all the captives being led across, and then people holding hands, the oficiantes they call them. A banker, Guillermo Vice, from Banco Vice in Peru, which doesn't exist anymore as a bank, but he was an aficionado of archaeology, and he said, I want to dig a site, I'll provide the funding, and I'll hire archaeologists to do it. So they got out there, and here's a recent reconstruction from a book that just came out last summer of this Huacacao. You can see it's a step pyramid with a ramp. This is very typical, very similar to what we had at Huaca de la Luna, the ramp to go up to the side. There's a big plaza in front, and the murals are not shown in detail here, but the same types of murals. And then on the top of it, this is where presumably the most sacred things went on at both pyramids. These were not accessible to the common people, I'm sure. You couldn't just wander up the ramp and show them your pass like a tourist could. They probably said, wait, why don't you go to the sacrificial area? It's right around the back. Anyway, a friend of mine, a colleague, Jeffrey Quilter from Harvard University, was digging this patio, which is named the Northwest Patio because it's in the northwest part of the site, in 2005. And what he found, this is a reconstruction of it that's beautifully done by the El Brujo project. And there were all these painted murals all around it. We're going to see the real actual ones in a minute, with mythical animals, with all kinds of very pretty geometric designs. The Moche also did these in textiles, and and it's been kind of a truism in Andean textile study for years. The textiles motivated a lot of Andean art. So many things are kind of geometric, the way they would be done in a loom, even though these are painted murals. But what we're going to look at today is when Jeffrey finished digging the courtyard, he noticed some discolored spots here, and that usually means that someone cut through the tomb or through the floor in ancient times. And this particular tomb is the bigger one, and there are 3 others. All right. So the El Brujo project contacted me when they were beginning to excavate the tombs and said, do you want to come and participate? And I said, great. Here you can see a part of it. You can see the murals not very well preserved. They're a little bit faded, but they can be reconstructed. There's a decapitator god here, and a lot of things that you find in Moche art. And here's the director of the Vice Foundation, Marco Veggio, who was at that time the director, and he helped fund the excavation of these tombs. Here is Jeffrey Quilter going down the ladder to see the larger tomb, and these are a number of people around coming to work on it. Now, in that tomb, in the upper levels, here's some of the beautiful ceramics they found, and these are typical of Moche ceramics. This is someone chewing coca. That's the little place where you keep your lime, and that's your little spatula you chew coca with. This one, I love Huaqueros because they call this El Ingeniero, the engineer, because he's always sitting down with a half-hard hat on and not doing anything. As opposed to the workers are all digging, the engineer is just sitting there going, come on, come on. Then this is a very interesting scene of a mother presenting her child to a cure, curandera, who's touching her. Presumably the child is sick or something, and so it's a little snapshot out of the past. We don't know who's who and what that was. Could that be the woman in this tomb? Okay, well, here's the funerary bundle. Once we got there, it was huge. We'll see in a minute how long it is and how much it weighed. And this is when I began to work on it, because there was a skeleton right along the side, and we decided we needed to take it out before they take the whole bundle out. Turned out to be a sacrifice. It was a child, and we now have done DNA, so it was a girl. Here's a rope around her neck with a knot in it, and when we took it out, I won't show you pictures of it in the lab, but it was clearly she was strangled, and that was a way to typically gently put people to death who were retainers in the tomb, rather than slash their throat or something. You don't do that to your own tomb retainers. Okay, her bundle also had some interesting features, an embroidered face on it. There was a mat over it. It may have been a mat she slept in or walked on during life. We'd never seen this before. And I'm saying her now, so I'm giving it away. But on this bundle, there was a little metal exposed. That's copper right there. And as we cleaned around it, it was clearly the head of a war club. The Moche War Club had a metal head with this rim around it, and there was one on the other side. So the archaeologists all went, great, another Lord of Sipan, another warrior priest. We've got another, great male tomb. We'll see later they weren't right, not their fault, but it was more complex than that. The reason they were thinking that is that other sites like Dos Cabezas, where we saw those really pretty nose ornaments from, these are 2 high-status males. One here has a spear thrower and a shield and darts that were thrown by the spear thrower. That was something used by the Moche for hunting and warfare. Here is a war club head, and then a smaller war club, kind of a symbolic one with this person. So when you see war clubs, they're only buried with men and never with women. One has never been found. So that was why they were thinking that. Well, they got this thing out of the ground just with sheer manpower. Today, you'd probably hire a tractor to go up there and lift it off, but not in Peru. And of course, it was right on top of the pyramid. This bundle was almost 2 meters long, and they've estimated it to weigh 120 kilos, so about 240, 250 pounds. That's a lot. I never would have guessed that, but we'll see why, perhaps because it's absolutely full of metals. Okay, it was taken down to the laboratory in the field, and luckily they have a laboratory there, and now there's a museum right there. They took off the mat on the outside. These are all specialists in textiles, so they're doing the initial cleaning and then conservation of the textiles to figure out how to open up this bundle, how to study it. Now, one of the smart things they did early on was they contacted a radiologist Dr. Hurtado, you see here, he is someone who goes out to the countryside and provides x-rays for poor people who can't get to the hospital or can't be moved or something like that. And his x-ray machine looks like something out of a science fiction movie, but it's an x-ray machine. And so we decided, or the project decided, let's do x-rays of this thing before we open it. Always a good idea. It was too big to do a CT scan of. I think it's too big around to fit through the gantry. By the way, gantries and CT scanners are getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we all get bigger and bigger and bigger. They also have super big ones for horses. That I just found out on the internet, looked at it, because a horse will not fit through one of those, even voluntarily. But what he did was, this is a little cartridge for the x-ray. And so he did x-rays head to toe of this. We wanted to see them, each one as they came out. And he said, no, I need to do the whole thing. And so we waited all afternoon and we were going, oh, come on, come on. So here he is finally setting them down there. And these are our project members who are looking. And what you could see, and I just have to point it out, is amazing amounts of metal. Everything that's white here is metal. It's gold or it's gilded copper. You can see elements of jewelry. You can see part of the war club head on one of these sides. And you can see these things, which we found later were spear thrower handles. And here you see some of the complexities. A few things we could see there. Can you see the parrot? This is a parrot. It's on a spear thrower. This is once we got it open much later, a month or two later. And it was a bird. There were several of those here. There's another one, and then others in the form of human figures. And then there were all of these shafts. These were spear thrower shafts. But one of my colleagues, a young colleague, Melissa Lund, who I've worked with for years, she's from Peru. She took a look at this and she said, Doctor, look at this. What she could see was the pelvis, and she could see, as I could, and I agreed with her, the width of the pubic bone typical of women, of females, not narrow, and the angle is typical, the subpubic angle, and so on. Just a textbook picture of this is a laboratory photograph of another, in an osteology book. But she said, uh-oh, I think it's a girl. And that's at that point, though, we decided not to say it's a girl or it's a woman, because sometimes in x-rays, things can be tipped the wrong way, that you may not get a perfect view of it. We were pretty certain, but we wanted to not put our feet in our mouth and say it's a woman and then open it up much later and find out, no, it was a woman. And we'll see, she's the most elaborate woman's tomb. Her tomb is the most elaborate we've ever seen in Peru. Then began a long period of unwrapping textiles. Thousands of meters of textiles were wrapped around her. And this is Arabelle Fernandez, a specialist, and there's Melissa Lund helping. This took a long time because if you're a textile specialist, you can't do what the grave robbers would do, take a machete and chop into it, or cut it with scissors. You can't cut knots and things with scissors. You have to very carefully disassemble it and take notes the whole way. So Arabelle was very patient. After the first multiple wraps, metal objects started coming out, and you can see them here. This is some kind of large garment. It's not something she wore, but it would be like a panel covered with gilded copper plates. It's the copper has corroded, so it looks like just copper, but it's gilded copper. Here are the war clubs. You can see them wrapped up in there. And here you see them from the talk title when they've been uncovered and those other textiles have been removed. There's something up here, and this is where the head is. And pretty soon it was clear these are headdress ornaments. These are gold, solid gold, hammered gold, things that went on to your head. There were 4 of these here, just 2 of them, with the little diadems here. This is I call it a kitty because it looks like a cat. This one is kind of a supernatural fanged face. So they were mote deities with some other elaborate, smaller designs here. This would go on your head with a circular crown, and we'll see later how it would be worn. There were 4 of these that were found. Underneath those was an inner bundle with a monkey face and painted red here. They're covered with cinnabar, a real red pigment, and wearing an earring. That's its ear, and wearing an earring, but all tied up and sewn together here. So what they had to do was take it apart thread by thread, or at least part by part, and record it all, because they didn't want to lose any information on how the knots were tied and so on. Now, just at that point, right in this area where they were going down to textiles, they found the first things that were interesting to me. They are needles, and they're gold needles. They're the first gold needles that have ever been found in Peru. Copper needles and others are known. They're little holes, there are little eyes in them, so we know they're needles. There is where they were found as they were unrolling. These are the needles there. These are something needles and weaving implements are associated with women in ancient Peru and in Moche society. So we now have some things that are male-oriented, some things that are female-oriented. Now, what she also had was, as they got down further, she had items of clothing that at the time when we first were seeing it, we didn't know what they were. We knew they were textiles. Let me just show you the details. There's one that's a beautiful, it's embroidered in geometric designs. The other one is painted in these little volutes. Now, we know that the Moche were not buried wearing clothing. They were always buried nude, but clothing was sometimes put in the bundles with them for the afterlife. And she has three. I'm only showing you these two here. But just to show you how amazing the preservation is, and think back to the Lord of Sipan, it's just a pile of copper and so on. Look at this knot. It looks like it could have been tied 5 minutes ago. This is raw cotton here and here. She's stuck with all kinds of raw cotton in her bundle here as well. And it's just pristine. It's not discolored. It's not falling apart. So this string, by the way, was just to help them map it, draw it carefully. As they got down further, the bundle started looking like what we normally think of a mummy form, like from Egypt, where if you had an Egyptian mummy, this is kind of the shape. That has no relation to Egypt. They never knew each other, but it looks a little like that. And you can see these canes that were wrapped around to support the bundle. And here's Chris Donnan, who made regular visits to this, and being the world expert on Moche art and archaeology, he was a great guy to have come and look at things. And he said, I don't want to miss this. Okay. As they got that kind of mummiform cloth off, more gold gilded copper plates all along here, and a bowl that's apparently, and in fact, over her face. It was put over the face, and this gold has an interesting color. It's a little bit reddish. It's a gold copper alloy bowl, but mainly gold. Finally, I was on pins and needles because I was there with the National Geographic photographer, Ira Block, who'd been sent down there, and we were both sitting around for a month. I was taking pictures as I did this. He was hoping to get pictures of the body, and I was eager to see the body. And it wasn't until we were packing our bags to leave, we said, we've got to go. They gave us a phone call and said, oh, we got the body exposed. How much? It's a whole thing. Here's a close-up of the upper part of it. And you're going to see it's quite interesting. There's a gold and copper bowl over the face, then a whole bunch of necklaces. Some of these are metal, so that's the kind of stuff that was showing up in the x-rays. She also shows real wrinkling of her abdomen. And immediately people thought maybe she died in pregnancy or shortly after giving birth. We haven't established that yet, and I asked my mummy expert friends, including Art Alfter, who unfortunately is now with the ancestors. He said it could be pregnancy, could be bloating of the body after death, which is less romantic, or just some artifact of decomposition. Now we can see now she has braids, and that was typical of Moche women. So her hair is appropriate. Okay, now you're going to see something else though on her arms that's quite dramatic. She had tattoos on both arms all the way up and down. And here's a close-up of her right hand that shows things. Now I'm going to show you a little better so you can understand it. This has been drawn very carefully by the artist. This is this hand here. And you see these little mythical things. They're interpreted as catfish because they have whiskers in Moche art. And then you can see some other things. I always ask my students, what do you think that is? Anybody, does it look like anything?
Light bulb.
Light bulb? Spider, how about a spider? Let's go with a spider. Yeah, a spider, if you've seen spiders. And then this one, probably an octopus. And then other things that are mythical, like this catfish type of thing, although it may be kind of a realistic way to show a catfish head. And of course, other mythical things like these things that are snakes that then turn into bird heads, with teeth and things, strange items. Now down here, there's a catfish, and then there's this little creature here, who we know from Moche art, and what you're going to see in a minute is painted on her walls of her tomb as well, or in the courtyard. So let's take a look at that. Here is this little guy tattooed on our, and this is, we know it as a, what we call a moon animal. It's something from the Requai culture, which was contemporary with the Moche, just higher up in the mountains. And you can, I think, see it here. This is kind of reversed, but there's several of these moon animals, and they're painted on the walls of the courtyard where she was buried. So some of these things from Moche art we know and can recognize. Other things, like this row of human heads, who knows what that means? This is still being analyzed and studied. So these are tattoos. And of course, you only find tattoos in mummies. You cannot find them in skeletons. They just fall apart. People often say, can you see it in bone? It doesn't stay. So this was, again, exceptional preservation that she has. All right. Now, let's just take a look at a few other things that were found with her. These are the necklaces that are made of semi-precious stones and gold. I'll just show you some close-ups. There were 12 large beads around her neck in this form, and this is a fanged face. One of these, one of her crowns has a similar design. And then these 27 small beads in the form of human heads with their eyes half closed, like I look like on my driver's license photo. And they said, oh, I said, I was blinking. Can you take that? They said, oh, it'll be fine. And so what we say now is that if the state police pull me over, I'll say, I look more sober in person than on my driver's license. So let me go. Anyway, these things are probably not drunk drivers. They may be trophy heads. The Moche did decapitate some of their enemies and improve their trophy heads made by the Nazca and others. So that would be kind of a scary thing to wear around your neck if you're a woman. You know, if you're having an argument with somebody, you say, okay, I'm putting on a head necklace. I'll have to remember that for home. Now, in November of 2005 was a difficult year for us here. That was Katrina. And I flew back from Peru the night before Katrina came to New Orleans, and I didn't realize what was coming. The airline said, Delta said, well, we've canceled flights to New Orleans. And I said, well, I want to get back. They said, well, we can fly you to Atlanta. And I said, that's fine. And then in Atlanta, they said, oh, wait, we can fly you into Biloxi. And I called my wife and told her that. She said, no, you know, Biloxi is normally 90 minutes away, but there was contraflow traffic by then. Yeah. So I had to take all these back roads with my cell phone to get back to New Orleans. And I rented the last rental car at the airport. If I hadn't, it would probably be destroyed today because Biloxi was right in the path of it. Anyway, I had to stay home for a while, and Tulane had to close for fall semester. So it gave me an opportunity to go back down to Peru again, and I did. So I went down in November. They had taken her body off of all of these other things, and now we could look at it more carefully. Here, for example, is an X-ray of her pelvis without all of the distractions. That's what I call metal objects, a distraction. And it's very clearly female. It also shows some little depressions that you can just barely see here, but I'll tell you how we confirmed it later. These are called parturition scars, or pubic scars from giving birth, because at birth, you know, trying to get a human head out of the pelvis is difficult for anyone, and the pubic bones often separate a fair amount, and when they do, they sometimes are tearing ligaments and so on. So if they do, then they leave little depressions here, and these are only found in women, which is one reason that you should not find them in men unless it is, say, a car accident that they fractured their pelvis and tore things the same way. So, but this to me suggested she'd had at least one child. She was estimated to be about 25 years of age when she died, 25 to 30. So she was a young woman. We then had a chance to examine her. This is me giving her first dental checkup in 1500 years and whispering in her ear, you know, you should come back more often, as they all say. And here I am with a dental mirror, and I'm looking at her wisdom tooth on the lower in the mandible. In fact, it's abscessed. It has a carious lesion, and it was abscessing. So that would have given her pain at the time of death. Abscesses can be dangerous because if the bacteria get in the blood supply, you can get sepsis. But we don't know if that has anything to do with how she died. I also looked at her. I'm not interested in pose really, but this was we were looking and finding little insect holes in her feet. There were beetle larvae that had gotten into the wrappings, and then they died as adult beetles because they had nowhere to go after that. And we found just a whole bunch, hundreds of these things. So this is just the kind of little slight damage that happened to her skin. It's a species of beetle that likes dry tissue, like leather, books, and people's skin, if it happens to be there. Okay. We then got two gastroenterologists there. This was my idea, and luckily the Visa Foundation said, sure, we'll bring them out from Trujillo. It was an hour away. Because I wanted to see how well, was there any preservation of organs inside her chest or in her abdomen? Because the skin is there, but North Coast mummies usually don't preserve very well. South Coast and into Chile, sometimes you get internal organs. And that would have been important material to study. But we didn't dare break a hole in her skin because she was going to be exhibited in a museum and she's going to be curated for a long time. So here's an endoscope, which most of us don't want to see in our own life. Hopefully we're anesthetized. And so he went through, we looked for little damaged areas that he could peek in with. And his assistant there or his colleague is helping with locating a spot. He looked into the chest cavity and sure enough, it looked like a Quonset hut. He said it's just totally empty on the floor. There's just powder, parenchyma, he called it, just of the lungs and the heart. So those were not preserved. We then went into the pelvis, which I won't show you a photo of, but there was damage around the pelvic area because since people were saying, oh, maybe she was pregnant, maybe there was a fetus inside, we couldn't see it in x-ray or anything. So we went in and unfortunately, it got blocked by the sacrum at one point. He couldn't go any further. But I asked him, I said, can you do me a favor? Since you have this scary device, could you turn it and make a U-turn? And they can. It's like a snake, it moves. Do a U-turn, go into the pelvis and do a U-turn so I can look at those pubic bones from the side I want to see, from the dorsal side. And he did, and sure enough, really nice parturition scars. So we do know she'd had at least one pregnancy and birth, maybe two, you can't tell how many. It's not something that gets worse each time. We also, though, didn't find any evidence of a fetus inside, so we don't know how she died. And there are, of course, many ways to die. Now, once they'd taken her body out, there were some textiles below, and there was another copper gold plate. This is what her head rested on. But this is where some really amazing things came out. These are little packets where the arrows are pointing, and over here as well. And when we took them out, they contain nose ornaments. And then also what I saw interesting, there are spindles. She had probably 40 spindles in her wrappings. And these are spindle whorls, which you use to give a little weight to your spindle. So here's a close-up of the spindle whorls. What's nice about them is they're quartz crystal. We've never seen anything like that. Common women would have them made of clay or of some other material. These are things that were made clearly by a great worksman or workwoman who could work in quartz, a very hard stone. But here's some of the nose ornaments. And you can see clearly, here's one that's upside down or backwards. And here's a human face with a condor next to it. Let me just show you a sampling of these. She has more than 40 of these. We're still trying to figure out, is it 40 or 41? We're looking at the records of it. But just to give you an idea of some of the stuff, some of the nose ornaments that she was buried with. Now, did she wear these? Possibly. In Moche art, women are not shown wearing nose ornaments, men are. So I've suggested that since there were 40 of these, we've never found that many with a male burial. Lord of Zipan had 3, some of the others had 4 or 5. This is 40, much more. Either she was like Imelda Marcos of the Moche world, and it's collecting nose ornaments instead of shoes. This would, but I don't think so. But the workmanship is incredible. There's stones embedded. There are things in gold and silver, and there are things that you can recognize: a pair of warriors on each side, a pair of captives on each side, or a captive on each side. Here's the decapitator god holding his knife. He's actually holding 2 knives instead of a knife and a head. Condors in that face you just saw. Lizards around this supernatural face. Kind of dragon-like figures here. Here, crayfish probably, because they're on the coast. They don't have lobster off the coast right there. The waters are too cold, but they have crayfish in the rivers. So they had something in common with New Orleans. Here are some others, and here's a whole thing of human heads. So really dramatic things. And these are all hammered sheet gold and copper and gold, sorry. And so they weigh almost nothing. I wouldn't dare put one of those in my nose. I did go to a party for the opening of the Zipan exhibit in Washington, D.C. And we had these little gold foil nose ornaments that we could put on at the cocktail party. And we all looked really silly. They were just simple Creston things, but I realized you can't really drink well. It's like wearing a mask. But wearing one of these things that would shimmer in the sun, you could imagine even from a great distance, this would be part of royal repertoire. Now, she was also puzzlingly buried with 23 spear throwers. Now, no woman has ever been buried with spear throwers as far as we know in Moche archaeology. There are men buried with them, but usually they have one or two, and they're things that they presumably used in life because they show signs of having been used. These were never used, apparently, and I'll show you why in just a second. First of all, they're all very similar, and they either have a human figure at the top or the parrot. There's the handle. Okay. Now, we know from Moche iconography that spear throwers, and there's one with a bird head on it, are used both to hunt deer, and the deer hunting was apparently a ceremonial activity of the wealthy, like a hunting club, and they were used in combat. So here's one loaded to go, and it gives a dart, and these darts were scary looking because we found some of them. Some of them are metal, not at this site, but elsewhere. Some of them are barbed. You wouldn't want to have one of those things hit you because they would go very fast. But these are the spear throwers that she was just examples of them. And when we compare them to functional spear throwers, and this was a study that was done by a guy who's a spear thrower expert. They're clubs for spear throwers, by the way, if you ever get bored. Both in the United States and in Germany, people make spear throwers and throw them at targets, not at deer or people. But what you need to have for your spear thrower is a hook to engage your dart. None of hers have the hook, so they're not functional that way. And you see in Moche art the same thing, the way you have to attach it here. And there's a very clear hook on it. So why 23 spear throwers? I had my own feeling. I used to work in public figure security, and because UCLA was near Hollywood, so I worked for, can I mention it, Cher, and for Joan Rivers and Dean Martin. And I was part of a security team that either stayed at their house or went out in public with them. I thought, hey, maybe these are her security detail. And when she died, they were out of a job, so they could turn in their weapons, I guess, in a symbolic way. That's probably not what happened, but who knows? But people who said, "Oh, she was with all these spear throwers, she must have been a great warrior." I don't think so. These are symbolic. Okay. And we measured her. This is Melissa Lund measuring her, what bones we could measure. The head of your humerus, the top of your arm bone, is a very good indicator for sex determination. Men have larger diameters than women do because of their generally larger body. We measured her, and she's right, just kind of right where a typical Moche woman would be. So she's not particularly muscular. She's not an Amazon in that sense, although you don't have to be big and muscular to be a warrior. So we kind of discounted the warrior argument. So we're left with this question, who was this mystery woman? Since we had no written history, and we never expected a tomb like this with so much richness in it. Here is a National Geographic. They did great artwork. Early on, they did this depiction of her with one of the crowns and head ornaments, nose ornament, the war club, tattoos on her arms, and earrings. And that's a pretty realistic depiction of perhaps how those things were worn. At the time they did this, they didn't have any of her 3 dresses. So they just had her in what kind of made look like a V-neck t-shirt, but they didn't know what to put textiles on. So this is, short sleeve. That would be highly unlikely. Today we have those. Usually the Moche were either sleeveless or maybe had longer. I think the dresses were sleeveless. Okay, so who was she? Well, we're still trying to figure that out. This is just to show you where she's gone now. She's there at the bottom of, or the far end of this exhibit. This is a beautiful museum now at El Brujo, at the site itself. It's the El Brujo Archaeology Museum. And you can see the things that we've been talking about. Spear throwers, not all of them, but many of them. Those plated textiles, they've conserved them now to take off the copper oxidation, so you see them as pure gold. And here are the head ornaments. Here are nose ornaments and other items that were found with her. And then in this spot here, some of the many spindles and spindle whorls that were found, and little packets of yarn of different types of both cotton and alpaca wool. So the reason she's kind of a mystery is she doesn't fit on any of our definitions of what women should be buried with in Moche society and what men were buried with. And so it's an interesting case. What I've presented for in some symposia on gender and archaeology and trying to figure out things. I think the nose ornaments and the spear throwers, certainly in the war clubs, were gifts, funerary objects placed with people. And that is something that often happens in many ancient civilizations, whether it's King Tut or whether it's Iron Age England or something like that. So it doesn't detract in any way from her importance. She was clearly an extremely important and valuable person, and her death must have come as a terrible bit of news for that particular place. We don't know, in fact, whether she was from El Brujo, or maybe she married into El Brujo, or maybe she was from El Brujo and married someone from another ceremonial center. But when she died, they put all of this amazing stuff in her tomb. Now we can talk about it so much because the preservation is so good. The textiles are just perfect, except underneath her body where decomposition fluids tend to damage textiles. Now they're continuing to try and put a face on her and recreate how she might look. This is from a museum exhibit, and she's shown in one of these plate garments that, in fact, she wouldn't have worn. This is not. She didn't have dresses like this, but they decided to do that. One of her necklaces, and the two war clubs, which really don't make sense in Moche society. Men carried one war club. It was a two-handed weapon. They might have been symbolic symbols of power. And it could have been, or they could have been protective symbols around her bundle. And that's what I think personally that might be the best explanation. The war clubs, by the way, are ceremonial as well. They're much taller than a regular one, and they're gilded wood. And so they were probably never used in a practical way. Now, everyone wants to see what a face looks like. And every forensic show has something about facial reproduction. And in fact, we've done a couple of them here at Tulane for forensic cases. And one that actually helped help us lead to an identity of a person we found out over in Mandeville. I'm not a big fan of it in terms of its accuracy. I think it's over romanticized that, oh my God, they create exactly the face of the person. But a Colombian team that does it for forensic purposes mainly volunteered to scan her face, the mummy itself, digitally scan it, and then make a reproduction. Normally you put it in a CT scanner, but we couldn't move her to do that. So this is what it looked like. They presented her. This is the press conference in Lima a few years ago. And I was lucky enough to arrive just in time to go there and see it. And she rotated around. It was a great kind of display. And there she's been put in one of her dresses, at least the design of it, and her braids, which are tied together. So is that really exactly how she looked? Nobody knows, but we do know it was a woman. We do know how old she was, more or less. But what I want to show you is how Peru has responded to this in a really delightful way, I think. She has become a modern day celebrity. There she is paraded around, or at least people dressed like her. Here she's paraded before a stand with these soldiers carrying her. Here she's being carried in another town, different one and different person. Here she is standing there in a museum exhibit with her entourage. And here is the prettiest reproduction I've seen, the quality of objects and so on. Now, what I like about it is it reminds me of Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras parades, tableaus. Not all of the balls have those, but I've been to a few that had those tableaus where everybody, the curtains go and everyone applauds. And also that these things are often put on by really middle class, lower middle class, poor people. They become extremely proud of this woman. And just to compare, it'll be hard for you to see, but she's on a fancy gold litter with a fancy seat there. Here she's on what looks like a kitchen table, and it's a classic wooden Peruvian kitchen table. And she's holding a microphone, not a work light. But that's okay. And the kids are dressed in kind of simple costumes they probably made at home, or their mothers made at home, or fathers made at home. Some of these others are more elaborate, as you can see. And this one particularly is just beautiful. So she lives on, not only in her museum, and her body is there. You can only see it through a mirror, though. They decided to have some, give her a little bit of privacy, and they put cloth over her body, so that, you know, we all agree, you don't want a bunch of kids going there and gawking, or adults also. But she lives on in these public displays as kind of an ambassador of the Moche Society, and it's created a lot of pride in these small communities, and we hope it'll help them discourage grave robbing, which is a real problem in Peru. But it's really hard to control. The police don't have enough people. The Ministry of Culture don't either. So I haven't seen any of these parades, but I got these pictures off the internet. They go on all the time. They've done them for the Lord of Zipan as well, but I think hers are just kind of more groundswell, people putting things together. Now, if any of you want to know about, is there anything published on this? This is one of the problems. There are only 2 books published that include a description of her tomb. One is a general coffee table book on El Brujo as a site. The other one just came out last summer, La Señora de Cal, and I have a chapter in it on her body and skeleton and so on. But this is in Spanish, and this one has both English and Spanish. There's nothing yet published in English for the broader world, since English, not that Spanish is not a great language, but English is probably read by more people around the world than Spanish today, including the United States, of course. So what we plan to do, I need to show him here for a minute. This is Jeffrey Quilter, who I mentioned, who had excavated the patio. He was talking to me just last fall. He said, "John, we really ought to do a book in English on the Lady of Cal." I have a million photographs of the unwrapping of the objects, and he has great archaeological knowledge of that site and others that he's excavated, and the Moche Society in general. Just need to thank, though, just to finish up here, the Ministry of Culture in Peru gives us permits to excavate, and all of my excavations usually are binational, at least they're Peruvian and United States, so we don't go down there like Hiram Bingham and collect things and just bring them back. Fundación Vice is the foundation of which Marco was the director for years. They have a new director now. They've funded the excavations for 15, 20 years. National Geographic has given me and Jeffrey grants to do our field work, and the Stone Center here at Tulane has also supported our work back then. So I'm grateful for that, and I've had multiple graduate students who've been able to come down as well. So this slide again, what's ongoing and what's for the future? This is Lars Schmitz. He's at UC Santa Cruz, and he's one of the top DNA experts in the world, recognized worldwide. And this is his laboratory at UCSC Paleogenomics. He's now collected DNA from the Lady of Cal, from the other burials in her courtyard, from many other archaeological finds on the north coast of Peru, to take a look at what does her DNA say about us, and what does it say about her? What does it say about the other burials in her courtyard? Are they relatives? Are they offerings? Are they unrelated? And also other elite tombs that he's collecting samples from Zipan and elsewhere, to just see if perhaps we can detect genetically intermarriage between royal houses. Something that certainly happened in Europe right before World War I, when I was at the World War I museum recently, when there were all of these different kingdoms and governments in Europe, and they exchanged spouses, and they had genetic relationships with each other, and then eventually they went to war together at other times. So we're going to see if we can say something about that. And so that's ongoing, as well as the book. I hope to be working with Jeffrey on the book in the fall. So I wasn't watching my watch, but I think I'm good. So thank you very much for your time. And I'm happy to answer questions.
And you have a picture of the one that was a very vivid picture of the lady, and she seemed to be white. These people white on this was dark skin, and they showed that.
We know the skin color well because those kids that are carrying the people around, their descendants of the Moche, and we no, she would have had probably a relatively swarthy, maybe like me, I'm 1/4 Italian, so not really pale skin. But when people die and they mummify, sometimes their skin turns darker, particularly the Egyptians, because they rub it with resin, and that turns skin dark. And mummies in some other contexts do, but We don't really know for a fact what her skin color was, but we do know genetically she was a Native American, South American woman. And she would have straight black hair, but
Must
not.
be more of an Indian type skin.
Well, I don't know what you mean by Indian type skin because there are a lot of varieties up and down. If you're talking Amazon or North America or Eskimos, you know, you can't distinguish the skin, certainly laboratory wise, in any way between different groups of humans.
But her hair actually was not black. It looked like a brown. It had a little bit of, and I was wondering if people in that area also have a variation in hair color.
That's a good point. That comes down to what we call taphonomy, postmortem change.
Okay, so
Hair
does change.
degrades a little bit, and in fact, there are some mummies who have red hair. It looks red, and it's because of chemical changes after death. So her hair was probably jet black. And I can only say that just as a generalization, because I went to a movie theater in Trujillo years ago, and I was in the back, and every single head was
Right, you notice-
dark with straight hair, and I said, wow, I'm an outlier. And they were fine with it, but I could see the genetic homogeneity of it. Oh, sure.
Were you able to discover anything about the economy of the area? Where it all came from? Probably was a movie one. Were
Yes,
they importing it from the neighboring areas, or did they have an agricultural economy that would generate enough trade goods to barter for? Or do you have any thoughts?
yes, we do know a lot about it, mainly from archaeologists who focused on the economy of these societies. The Moche had thousands of years of occupation before them, and so the first people to come were fishing and eating wild plants. But well before the Moche, they developed agriculture. They grew corn, they grew avocados, beans, squash, all kinds of plants. They also were living close to the coast. El Brujo is on a platform right over the Pacific Ocean, so they ate a lot of seafood, as they still do today, which is what makes the coastal cuisine so wonderful. But they created irrigation canals. They learned how to draw water off of the river, like the Moche River. There's some incredible canal systems that they developed, and that would water fields. So they were, and it's generally totally agreed that there was more land under cultivation in Moche and Chilú times than there is today in Peru. So they were very good at that. Today they grow mainly sugarcane and other crops, but the Moche lived quite well as agriculturalists. They also had seafood. Now, to get the exotic goods like gold, those were probably found in river placer deposits in rivers. Someone was panning for gold and they could trade for it. Don't know what they would trade. They also had tropical feathers. Those had to have been traded from the Amazon, although there are some parrots that live on the coast of Peru. So they did draw from distant regions. And once they became a very organized society, they could probably demand products from people they conquered if they expanded. And the Moche did cover this entire, 300 miles of the coast or something like that. So I hope that kind of explains it. It was found in 2005. It's a long time ago, although it seems like yesterday every time I look at the pictures of it. But I've been wanting for years for them to publish a book on it, and they finally did, but it's just kind of technical and not as full as we'd like to do it. So it was a while ago. So it was the Katrina years when it was found.
And is there much overlap with Chile? I mean, you mentioned it's coastal.
Yes, the coastal peoples in general from Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Chile all had a lot of similarities, at least early on, because the fishing was excellent in Chile. The agriculture was never quite the equal of Peru. Peru had larger rivers and more arable land. But of course, those divisions of the political divisions that today didn't exist then. And when the Inca conquered the coast of Peru, they conquered Chile all the way down to what is today Santiago. And they conquered to the north as far as the Ecuador-Colombia border. So those countries didn't exist, of course, at the time, but they each have their own differences in resources and what they can do. Peru, for some reason, developed the most elaborate metallurgy and some of the finest ceramics ever done. All of these areas, though, did a lot of beautiful textile work. And unfortunately, though, in sites like Machu Picchu, it won't preserve because of the rain. It's too wet up there. But coastal burials with Inca outfits have been found. And those give us an idea of what they wore in the highlands as well. Yeah, yes.
Might have missed this. Look at the pictures. How old is she? Not her age, but where do we fit her on the timeline down there?
Okay, yes. She's been radiocarbon dated. I brought back some of the first samples and she's dating to about 8450 500. And that's kind of, well, we used to think that was late Moche, but now it's kind of middle Moche in time. So if you think about what's happening, you know, the Roman Empire has collapsed and I don't know what's going on in 8500 in Europe, but more or less contemporary with that's the date, more or less, when she died. And the Moche appear as a culture about 8200, and then they disappear in about 8850. And they disappear as an organized society. The people didn't leave, and they didn't, you know, like the Maya, the classic Maya sites collapsed one by one, but the Maya people are still there today. It's not like they died out. So the Moche descendants today come from that time period, but there were several other governments in between the Chimu and then there were the Inca in the 1470s when they conquered the north coast of Peru. So hopefully that puts it in some kind of perspective. And thank goodness for C14 dates, because used to be we just tried to do it on ceramic styles, and we've realized that the ceramic chronologies don't really work as well.
I wanted to ask you, how accurate is the DNA and the carbon dating if you go way back in history? I mean, much earlier than what we're talking about today.
Yes, well, DNA, you know, I like to tell students, if you want the best DNA in the world, go into a cave in Germany and find a Neanderthal skeleton, because they've been there for 40,000 years, but they're in a cold, they're like in a refrigerator without any change in temperature.
How many years?
40,000. Yeah, so there have been whole genomes of Neanderthals done now. I'm not a DNA person, but it's amazing. I never thought they could do that before. But with new techniques of next generation DNA sequencing and a variety of other things, DNA does not always preserve, though, equally well, and it doesn't preserve very well on the coast of Peru. And Lars is trying to figure that out, because I've sent him a number of samples of sacrificed children found at shallow depths, and their DNA is just not well preserved. It seems to be the high temperature, the salt in the soil, perhaps, and other things. Now, radiocarbon dating can go back to, and I'm rusty on this because I'm a consumer of radiocarbon too. Some of my colleagues here could say very definitely, maybe as far back as 10,000 BC, 15,000 BC. But what it's based on is the decay of a radiogenic isotope, and eventually you get half-lives of 5,000 years, and you go back to about 15, 30, or more, 20,000 years. There's very little of it left. Used to be you had to count it in a counter. Now they do mass spectrometry, and they actually count the number of carbon-14 atoms versus carbon-12, which is what it degrades into. So they can do a lot better, and it's a lot more accurate. So we can come plus or minus 50 years, even 40 years, whereas they used to do plus or minus 100 years or more to uncertainty. Because it's an uncertain thing like that.
That's 10,000 BC.
Yes, it can go back that far. And then when you get back to early human evolution and dinosaurs and things like that, you use other things like uranium dating or other things that have much slower decay rates. And that you can do. That extends it way back. But for most of what we do, for all of the cultures we're studying in South America, radiocarbon works fine. So, it's a good tool. Robert, I didn't see you back there. Robert Leverton, we went to high school together at Milton Academy, and then didn't see each other until once I was walking to my dog down the street. And Robert said, "Hey, dog." He's a local. You're a Louisiana boy, and but I'm glad to be back. So we've been back in the same town for about 20 years now. Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for coming. Any other questions? Sure.
How many kingdoms was then around at that time?
Among the Moche or among all?
That would have been intermarried.
Oh, I see. Okay. There are a number of sites, and I'd have to count them on my fingers that are major ceremonial centers that would presumably be like a kingdom or royal court. and there are probably about 5 or 8 on the north coast of Peru, so not a lot. Yeah, but of course, some were larger than others, some really were. Some people have argued that the pyramids at Moche was the capital of a Moche state in charge of all, that dominated all these things. We're now changing our minds and thinking it is a series of royal courts that probably had conflicts every now and then over river irrigation and other things, but were not a single state level organization like the Inca were. They were an empire, actually. So I may be counting wrong, but I'm just thinking the ones that I know about. So there are a few of them. It's always, genetics is always tricky, how do you determine for sure that the genetic material that's shared between two groups reflects their ancestry, or is it just chance? It'll be a hard one to answer, but it's worth looking into. Anything else? Anybody else? Okay, well, okay. Sorry.
Peru's not the most stable, politically stable area in the state. Did you have any problems with or are you considered neutral? And your colleagues, of course, but you mentioned a couple of the agencies. Those agencies also legitimize your presence now, so neither side messes with you.
Yes, and luckily I don't worry about people messing with me. I'm a diplomatic kind of guy, and people would agree that way. Some archaeologists fight with each other; they don't fight with government. Everyone has different theories, and whether it's chemistry or physics or whatever, or DNA, they're fighting against each other all the time, just in terms of academic opinions. Peru's had periods of difficulty. I started there during the Civil War, the Sendero Luminoso. I started in 1987, but I was not in a hot zone. And then I was a Fulbrighter twice. And once in 1989, they called me in and they said, we have to tell you where you can travel in Peru, where you can't go. And you have to tell us 2 weeks in advance if you're going to leave Lima and go somewhere else. And don't go in these parts of things. So they were all very cautious. I never had a problem. But as I was mentioning before my talk to one of you, I was going to go down with a field school from the University of Florida this summer. But because of the unrest in Peru now and the concern that it may flare up again, they're worried about college students going down there and having the university responsible and us responsible, because they have blocked roads, they have gotten into fights with tear gas, they've been shot by soldiers and police. So it's an unfortunate situation right now, and it doesn't seem to have a quick solution, because those who are protesting would like new presidential elections as soon as possible. The Congress says no, not for 2 years. Something. So there's not a lot of negotiation right now. I don't feel in danger, so I may go to do, for example, I haven't seen one of the skeletons from one of those tombs in the courtyard. I've seen all the others and studied them. There's one that wasn't unwrapped in time. So I may go down there, and I'm not concerned about that. But I can understand parents may not want to send students down who don't know the country, and maybe don't speak Spanish very well, or what happens if they get caught at a roadblock. Or get even worse. So I'm confident Peru will stabilize. It's been a great country for a long time, but like all governments, we have our difficult times and disagreements. And Peru has been very good about being welcoming me. I'm a guest there, and I return the favor by giving talks there, by teaching at their universities, by digging with colleagues. So I have a good relationship with them, so they don't look at me and go, you're an imperialist in our country. They've never called him, as far as I know, at least not in my case. Or maybe they say he's a benign imperialist. He's harmless. So I'm going to keep going back down. That's in the future. Okay, thanks. Did you?
Are you going to change site, the new site?
Oh, you're reading archaeology.
Yeah.
Yes, I didn't, yes, not this summer, but next summer. Chanchano, I'll just mention very briefly. It's after the Moche disappear, the Chimu arise about 80,000, and they build one of the largest cities ever built in Peru, Chanchan.
That's a big one.
It's a huge one. You can only you can appreciate it on the ground because they're like walls that are almost 30 feet high surrounding these royal palaces and things. And I've been planning to dig there with my colleague Gabriel Prieto. He wants to go there. And he did just a test excavation last year that was featured in Archaeology magazine.
How many houses they have?
I don't know, I forget, because I wasn't with him on that excavation, I was working with him on another. But it's a huge city. And I'm not joking, I've been working at a little beach town, sacrificial sites all around this beach town for years. And I'm saying we're going to the big city next year. You know, it's kind of like going to New York City or going to Washington or something. It's gonna be great. You need volunteers. Well, I have had volunteers sometimes, but it can sometimes be a little challenging. To do that. But anyway, yeah, I get archaeology and you'll see me quoted in there. It's a nice magazine and I've been in there a few times on that. So Stan, stay tuned. Next year, we're gonna go seriously into Chun Chun. And so, yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Lauren Hurwitz from the Alumni Association. I just wanted to give you a.
I thought maybe you were just shopping, but no. Thank you, it's for me.
The Emeritus Club, for today. Jimmy, I don't know if you have anything you want to say before.
Just-
wrap up?
I do want to say, thank you all very much for coming. If you're from Tulane, graduate or non-graduate, more than 50 years ago, you're a member of the Emeritus Club. No dues, you don't even have to take a pledge, but you're a member and you're entitled to be in touch with us. If you're not, let Gabby or Lori or me know, and we'll get you in touch. If you're less than 50 years, then you're a member of the Tulane Alumni Association, which is also sponsored with this event. This is an inaugural lecture. We hope to have many more. However, you found out about this, stay tuned. If you need to be in more regular touch, again, let one of us know. And thank you very much for coming today. And thank you for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Okay.
Off to a good start.